plates. بس قبل ما نبلش في how urinary tract infections take place ممكن نحكي شوي عن normal defenses of the urinary tract. So the urinary tract, similarly to the central nervous system, which we talked about, should be a sterile environment. You shouldn't find any bacteria there. It's supposedly a sterile environment. But unlike the central nervous system, bacteria can reach the urinary tract or commonly reach the urinary tract, but is dealt with in a proper way. So if the bacteria reaches the central nervous system, the immune system mounts an exaggerated immune response that is harmful to the host and destroys the tissue and so on. While in the urinary tract, bacteria can commonly reach into the urethra and maybe to the bladder, but the immune system can handle it properly and eliminate this bacteria without an exaggerated immune response. So the immune system, to some extent, is balancing, preventing the colonization of bacteria, and at the same time, not mounting an exaggerated immune response against this bacteria. Okay? So how does the immune system do that? We have some innate defenses. So they're not adaptive. We have some innate defenses. Some of them are mechanical, some of them are chemical, some of them involve proteins. So the mechanical ones is, as you might expect, the flow of urine and the action of micturition. So as the urine flows from the kidneys to the ureters, to the bladder, and to the urethra, this flow of urine will flush out any pathogens that are trying to adhere or stick to the urinary tract. So the flow of urine, contraction of the bladder, or micturition will all help in flushing out any pathogen that tries to make it to the urinary tract and colonize it. At the same time, the composition of urine, its pH, the low pH, and also the presence of certain salts, urea, and certain acids, all of those they form a harsh environment for the bacteria to grow in. Okay? So the chemical composition of urine is also detrimental to bacteria, so it cannot survive in there. We also have certain proteins that prevent bacterial survival, like, for example, lactoferrin. What does lactoferrin do? I'm sorry? Yes, it binds iron, because iron is very important for bacterial survival. So what the body does through millions of years of co-evolution between pathogens and hosts, like animals, like human, the hosts try to sequester iron or preserve it in a way that the pathogen does not have access to it. So that's how important iron is to the pathogen, that the host secretes proteins, like, for example, lactoferrin, that strongly binds iron and prevents it from being used by the pathogen. Okay? So in urine, we have lactoferrin that strongly binds iron and does not allow it to be a source of growth for the bacteria. Okay? And also, we have certain soluble factors like immunoglobulins, especially immunoglobulin A or IgAs. Those are commonly found in all mucosal surfaces. Yes, they're important in mucosal immunity. And what do? They prevent the attachment of the bacteria to the epithelium. So we can see that attachment is quite an important step in formation of the infection. That's why we have several defense mechanisms to prevent it. The flow of urine, the secretory IgAs, and some other proteins, all of them prevent the first step, which is attachment of the bacteria to the epithelium, and thereby it prevents infection. And we will see how the bacteria later on in the pathophysiology, how it can overcome all of those mechanisms and cause an infection. Now, you'll notice that we will talk a lot about definitions in urinary tract infections. So when we say a urinary tract infection, this involves a few entities below it. So here we have the urinary tract of a female and one of a male. And we put them side by side because the differences are important in the much higher incidence of UTIs in females than in males. So we can see both have 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, 1 bladder, and then a urethra in both. Of course, females do not have a prostate, and also female urethra is much shorter, you can see it here, much shorter than the male urethra, right? And this is important in predisposing females to UTIs. So urinary tract infections, what do we mean by them? We mean, it could mean infection of the urethra or the prostate or the bladder, right? In something called lower urinary tract infections, or it can mean infection of the kidneys in something we call upper respiratory tract. So we can say upper respiratory tract, urinary tract, if the kidneys are involved, or lower if the bladder and urethra and prostate are involved. So pyelonephritis is inflammation of the kidneys, prostatitis of the prostate, cystitis of the bladder. And then we have something called asymptomatic bacteriuria. And that is when we have bacteria in the urine, okay, that is not associated with any symptoms of urinary tract infection. So urinary tract infections will have symptoms of pain when you urinate, you go more often to the bathroom, there's frequency, you feel like you need to go to the bathroom or urgency. So there's certain symptoms associated with the presence of bacteria. And if those symptoms are present, then we will call it cystitis, prostatitis, pyelonephritis, depending on where the bacteria is. But if those symptoms are not present, but there's still bacteria in the urine, we call this asymptomatic bacteriuria, or presence of bacteria in the urine without the presence of symptoms. And how do we discover this? Maybe in a routine urine examination, we culture the urine and we find that this person has bacteria in their urine, but at the same time, they're not complaining of any symptoms related to UTI. So in this case, we call it an asymptomatic bacteriuria. And when we come to the clinical part in the next lecture, we'll see why asymptomatic bacteriuria is an important entity also in UTIs. So we said that females have much more higher chance of contracting a urinary tract infection. Actually, the numbers are quite high. They say that as many as 50 to 80% of women in the general population will have at least one UTI during their lifetime. So the majority of females have experienced urinary tract infections, unlike males, who very rarely will get a urinary tract infection. And also, out of those who have a urinary tract infection, of those females, around 20 to 30% of them will have recurrent episodes. So they will have the symptoms of the infection again. If those symptoms happen within 2 weeks, then probably the initial infection has not gone away. We call it a relapse of UTI. If the symptoms have gone away for more than 2 weeks, and then maybe after a month, the same patient comes again with the UTI, then we will call it a reinfection. So again, we have many divisions in which we can divide UTI. We said upper urinary tract pyelonephritis in the kidneys, lower bladder and urethra and prostate. We can call them symptomatic, like cystitis, pyelonephritis, or prostatitis. They can be asymptomatic UTIs. They can also be acquired within the community, as in the epidemiology we're talking about here, or they can be acquired in the hospital, as we see in the next slide. They can also be a relapse if they happen within 2 weeks of the first UTI. They can be a reinfection if they happen after 2 weeks. And all of those divisions are important clinically, as we will see later on, right? So in the hospital, also UTIs are quite common, and they are the most common type of healthcare associated infection, which means an infection that happens in a hospital setting. Most commonly, the most common infection is a urinary tract infection, right? So more than 30% of infections in the hospital from people sitting in the hospital already are urinary tract infections. And the majority of them, or here they say virtually all of them, come from the usage of catheters. You know what a catheter is? It's a tube inserted within the urethra. Okay, so it's a tube that is inserted within the urethra of a male or a female in order to be able to void the urine that is found in the bladder. So here there's there's urine in the bladder, and for some reason this urine is not excreted to the outside. So what you do is you insert a tube that reaches all the way into the bladder and helps excrete the urine. So those catheters are responsible for hospital-acquired urinary tract infections. And the infection can be endogenous, which means your own microbiota, your gastrointestinal or skin microbiota is responsible. So when they insert the tube, some of the normal microbiota is somehow attaches to the tube and gets inserted deep into the bladder and causes the infection. Or it can be exogenous. The healthcare worker who is putting in the catheter is not paying attention, did not listen well in the microbiology lecture, and the pathogens that are on his hands have been transmitted to the catheter and they cause the infection. Or maybe he did not sterilize the catheter well enough and that caused the infection. Okay? Now, if we look at them in numbers, the incidence of urinary tract infections, we can see that in preschool, school, and reproductive age, the majority of the lifetime of a human, yes, there is a much higher prevalence of females to males, 10 to 1, 30 to 1, 50 to 1, of UTIs in females compared to males. While at the extreme of ages, in neonates and in geriatrics, or people above 60, we see that the ratio almost equalizes in those two. So why is it in neonates you think we have almost equal ratio? I'm sorry? Well, maybe that can be the cause, but actually, it is thought that some congenital malformations in the urinary tract passage are more common to happen in males than in females. Okay? And with those abnormalities comes what? Stasis of urine. So the flow of urine is not proper, and so you get a higher chance of getting UTIs. Okay? So this is thought why, this is the reason behind why in the neonatal period there isn't much of a difference. Actually, even males are to some extent higher than females because of the congenital malformations that they have in the urinary tract and are more common in males. How about the geriatric? Why do the geriatric also have a similar ratio? The ratio starts to equalize with the geriatric age. Yes. Or prostatic hyperplasia or hypertrophy. When the prostate enlarges, yes, here the prostate enlarges and it prevents the flow of urine through the urethra. And when that happens, we have stasis and we have an increased chance of getting a urinary tract infection. Okay, so this is the reason for the geriatrics. And we said the reason responsible for this ratio here is the anatomical differences between females and males. A much smaller urethra in females makes it much more accessible for bacteria to go in the urethra and reach the bladder and cause infection. Okay, so the incidence makes sense to some extent. Another categorization of urinary tract infections: upper, lower, symptomatic, asymptomatic, community, relapse, reinfection. Now this one is rather also important, much more important clinically. You can divide them into uncomplicated UTIs or complicated UTIs. Uncomplicated UTIs happen in a previously healthy individual. So there is no predisposing factors that causes this person to get the UTI. We call it an uncomplicated UTI. While if we have certain abnormalities, like we said, the urinary obstruction caused by prostate hypertrophy or hyperplasia, if you're immune suppressed, if you cannot fully empty your bladder because of a neurological reason, you'll come to pathology, you'll come to diseases within the bladder that prevents full clearance of all the urine from the bladder. And this retention of the urine will lead to an increased risk of UTIs. And also, and most importantly, the presence of foreign bodies. As we said, catheter-associated UTIs in the hospital settings also fall under complicated UTIs because they are a predisposing factor for the development of a UTI. So if a healthy female comes to you, previously healthy female comes with symptoms of UTI, do we call it a complicated or an uncomplicated UTI? It's an uncomplicated UTI. If a 60-year-old comes to you with benign prostatic hyperplasia and urinary tract infection, what is it? It's a complicated. In a person sitting in the hospital with a catheter inserted, starts complaining of pain when they urinate, that's a complicated urinary tract infection. Okay? And one of the reasons why we care about this is because the etiological factors somehow can be different between uncomplicated UTIs or complicated UTIs. Although in both, the biggest piece of the pie goes to whom? As an etiological agent or the pathogen causing the UTI, E. coli. Or here, UPEC. What does UPEC stand for? Uropathogenic E. coli. So E. coli is part of the normal gastrointestinal tract, right? Remember when you studied in the introduction or in the GI tract, we normally have different strains of E. coli in our gastrointestinal tract. They are harmless and maybe beneficial. Who knows? We need some more research on the microbiome to tell us. But we have E. coli normally. Some of those E. coli, they gain certain virulence factors that allows them to cause urinary tract infections. And this type of E. coli, we call it uropathogenic, which means it can cause disease in the urinary tract. Uropathogenic E. coli. See, 75% of uncomplicated UTIs or UTIs in healthy individuals, previously healthy individuals, and 65% of complicated UTIs. So always, most common etiological agent, uropathogenic E. coli. We also have some others that are worth mentioning: Klebsiella pneumoniae, Staphylococcus saprophyticus, which is part of the normal skin flora. It's a coagulase negative staph, okay? Along with Staph epidermidis and other types of staph, they are part of the normal skin microbiota. Then we have Enterococcus species, and we can talk about them a little bit, each of those. We'll talk about briefly. But you can see here the complicated UTIs. In this figure, they say risk factors are indwelling catheters, immune suppression, urinary tract abnormalities, antibiotic exposure. So we have many risk factors for the complicated UTI. While for an uncomplicated UTI, the risk factors includes being a female. If you're a female, the anatomy predisposes you to getting a UTI. And you can maybe ignore this older age, younger age risk factor. It does not, I don't know, it does not make much sense. So if you are a human, basically, you have a risk factor of an uncomplicated UTI, older and younger age. Okay, so the most common cause, etiological agent, uropathogenic E. coli. It's a gram-negative rod. You can see here, rod-shaped. And you can see that in the light microscope, it's gram-negative. And if you look at its colonies, it has some grayish, moist colonies. And as we said, it forms part of the gut microbiota, but subset of E. coli will cause the urinary tract infections, and that subset is called uropathogenic E. coli. We have also some other E. coli subsets involved in epidemics, but those epidemics are associated with diarrheal diseases. You have probably learned about already in the gastrointestinal tract. So we have, what is the subset? O137H. Yeah, I know it's an E. coli subset associated with epidemics of diarrhea. So E. coli can be normal, harmless gut microbiota, can cause epidemics, cause diarrheal diseases, and can cause also urinary tract infections. And this is the one we are interested in today, uropathogenic E. coli. Now, it's also worth mentioning Enterococcus faecalis. We said it is quite common in complicated UTIs. Like, for example, when you have a catheter. Those enterococci are gram-positive, and they are found واحدة منكم تيجي هون لو سمحتي أو هون. Okay. Those enterococci are gram-positive and found in pairs or short chains. So we can see that they form, you usually see them in pairs. So they are some sort of a diplococci. Okay, and they are normally found in the large intestine. Again, like E. coli, normally found within the large intestine, and they are quite common cause of complicated UTIs associated with an insertion of a catheter. So if we see here, here's a bladder. In a normal situation, if Enterococcus faecalis somehow manages to reach the bladder, our immune system will be strong enough to clear the infection, if an infection develops in the first place. While in a person with a catheter, the tissue damage that takes place and the inflammation, and also the surface of the catheter itself, is suitable for the bacteria to adhere to. So if an E. faecalis reaches the bladder of a person with a catheter, it will easily overcome the immune defenses in the bladder and maybe form biofilm attached to the fibrinogen that is released from the damage of the tissue, attached to the surface of the catheter, and then cause an infection. So in a person with a catheter, always remember Enterococcus faecalis. First, the most common, uropathogenic E. coli, but then you should consider Enterococcus faecalis. Also, Klebsiella pneumoniae, it's a pathogen that is part of the normal flora of the gastrointestinal tract, and recently it has been shown to be found more commonly in hospital settings. So it can be found in sinks, carpeting, different surfaces. And that is important because of its ability to resist a variety of antibiotics. So you should be aware of Klebsiella pneumoniae. And we should mention also that Enterococcus faecalis is resistant to many antibiotics. And even it's thought to give its antibiotic resistance genes to other bacteria. Through what? What is the process of how does bacteria share resistance genes? Sorry? Yes, plasmids, or in general, horizontal gene transfer, right? Horizontal gene transfer. So we have conjugation, the two bacteria attach, then they send the plasmid through the sixth pilus. Or we have transformation, where the DNA that contains the antibiotic resistant genes is taken up by another bacterium. And I say this because it's thought that MRSA, or methicillin resistant Staph aureus, acquired some of its resistant genes against vancomycin. It acquired it from Enterococcus faecalis. So they both existed in the same environment, maybe in an infected host, and Enterococcus faecalis, maybe it died, released its DNA, and Staph aureus took up the plasmid in a process called transformation, and that led to the acquiring of new resistant genes. So remember that Enterococcus faecalis is quite resistant to antibiotics, and so is Klebsiella pneumoniae. And finally, we have also another member of the Enterobacteriaceae called Proteus mirabilis, and it has some unique characteristics that sets it apart from other bacteria. For example, its ability to swarm. Yes? So swarming, you refer to a group of birds as a swarm, maybe. Kasir. Yes. So the bacteria, see here, it's plated. We have colonies, but out from the colony spreads this swarm. Same here. There's a colony here, and then it forms this typical shape where where the bacteria is spreading away from the colony in something we call swarming motility. Another thing is its ability to produce urease. And urease, this enzyme, it breaks down urea, forming ammonia, among other molecules. So the presence of ammonia in the urine will mess with the pH of the urine. So, as we said, one of the defense mechanisms in urine is its low pH. So, if Proteus is infecting the urinary tract, it will secrete urease. Urease will break down urea and form ammonia. Ammonia will increase the pH of the urine, thereby leading to some problems, one of which is the formation of precipitates. So when the pH changes, we have some ions precipitating together because of the change of pH, like calcium and magnesium ions. They precipitate and they form urinary stones. Some of them are rarely seen in general, but rarely seen outside of a Proteus infection, right? And here are some of the examples of those stones. Now, all of those bacteria that we have mentioned, and especially uropathogenic E. coli, they have their ways of overcoming the defense of the urinary bladder. So we said the urinary bladder, micturition, contracts, pushes urine, prevents the attachment of bacteria. But bacteria can counteract this with the presence of adhesins, like fimbria. So fimbria is quite an important virulence factor in any uropathogenic bacteria. So they all need to have strong attachment to the epithelial layers of the urinary tract. And also flagella is another virulence factor, because the bacteria needs to swim around to reach from the urethra into the bladder. So it needs something to propel it. And flagellum works like a motor and then propels the bacteria up into the bladder. Right? Toxins also is another virulence factor. You know what virulence factors is? Those are factors that the bacteria has that can help it cause disease. Okay? So maybe even it's a bit of a difficult term to explain, because even non-pathogenic bacteria, our normal flora or microbiota, also have fimbria, right? They attach to the GI tract. And some of them have flagella also for motility and so on. But if those same factors are helping in causing disease, we call them virulence factors. So all of those factors that we are listing help the bacteria in causing disease. That's why we call them virulence factors. So the fimbria for attachment, flagella for some motility, toxins. Those toxins will kill the epithelial layer cells, so the bacteria can go deeper, and also can even sometimes kill white blood cells that try to attack the bacteria. And we also have siderophores, which enable the bacteria to chelate iron. Okay? If you remember when we talked about the defenses, we said lactoferrin strongly binds iron so that it's not available for bacteria. Now bacteria, on the other hand, secretes siderophores that go and try and take any unbound iron to use it for growth. So iron is quite important for bacterial growth, as we see from the interaction of the host and the pathogen. Yes? And we also have ways to evade the immune system. the one we keep coming back to, of course, the capsule. Anti-phagocytic capsule, quite important. We have certain antigens that also help in the immune evasion. And even some gram-negatives of the Enterobacteriaceae family are thought to change their antigens regularly. They change the antigens so that the immune system cannot recognize them, right? How does the immune system recognize the bacterium? Through its antigens. If the bacterium keeps switching it, the immune system cannot recognize it, and that's how it evades the immune system. So we have a variety, an arsenal of weapons that the bacterium uses to overcome the immune system. But all in all, we go back to the triad, the same we faced in the CNS infections, in any sort of infection. You have three things that act together in order to come with the final result of either infection, colonization, or nothing at all, elimination of the bacterium. And what are those three? We have factors in the organism, like, or most importantly, virulence factors, their presence and also their expression. In the host, we have factors related to the immune response. For example, if you're immune compromised, you are more likely to get the UTI, but also specifically in UTIs, we have also some behavioral factors in the host. So, for example, sexual intercourse has been found to be an independent factor that increases the risk of UTI, or even also multiple sexual partners increases the risk of a UTI. So we have behavioral factors from the host. We have also a genetic background. So certain people have a higher risk of developing UTIs. They found that in females who have UTIs, their daughters or their mothers also have a higher chance of getting a UTI also. So it runs in families somehow. Maybe there's a certain protein that the bacteria can adhere to and helps in its adherence to the epithelium, or the absence of a certain protein leads to decreased clearing of the bacterium. But anyway, there are genetic factors also that help in having the UTI, or that will affect the final outcome of either an infection, colonization, or an elimination. And finally, the environment in which this interaction takes place. So if in the environment we have a foreign object like a catheter, then there's a higher chance. If in that environment, for example, in females, before it gets to the urethra, it needs to pass through the vagina. So it seems that vaginal ecology also, what sort of microflora is found within the vagina, also affects the ability of the pathogen to reach into the urethra and cause the UTI. Okay? So let's take a deeper look now on how actually this takes place. So we have the bacterium with the most important virulence factors, the fimbria attaching to the epithelial cells, and it seems now that the consensus now is that the bacteria goes intracellularly. I don't know. So it seems that E. coli goes intracellularly and starts to replicate within the uroepithelium. And that will lead to two outcomes. If a bacteria goes inside the cell, what is the outcome? First, the cell will sense the bacterium and starts secreting inflammatory cytokines, like IL-6 and IL-8. Okay? There's certain pattern recognition molecules that recognize the bacteria within the cell, start secreting cytokines. Another way is that the cell will die, okay? Either because of necrosis, for example, there's too many bacteria inside it, then it blows up, necrosis. Or maybe the cell itself commits itself to death, so commits suicide or apoptosis, programs cell death. Some say it can be a mechanism by which the uroepithelium tries to clear the infection. So the cells start to exfoliate or die off from the uroepithelium in an effort to kill the bacterium inside it. Okay, and we see there's an infiltration of immune cells that will also try and clear the infection, but the bacterium can, in certain cases, persist in pockets hidden away and then cause a relapse in the infection. Remember when we also said there can be a relapse or a reinfection? If the bacteria manages to hide away, the symptoms disappear for a period, but then they replicate, and in less than 2 weeks, you have the symptoms again. That's called the relapse. And probably this is the mechanism of a relapse. While a reinfection means that the infection has been cleared and everything, but then new bacterium has came and caused a reinfection. And if we see it in steps, first, the uropathogenic bacteria, where is it coming from? We said most of them are normal bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract. So they come probably from the anus and perineum, and from there, somehow they make it to the ureter. And if you think about it, that's why anatomically, right, it's very difficult to reach from there into the male, urethra. It's very difficult to go to the male urethra. While in females, the anatomical barriers are much smaller. So it's much easier for the bacterium to gain access to the urethra. That's the first step. Contaminates the periurethral region and goes into the urethra, okay? And then it will colonize the urethra for a certain period of time and then go up into the bladder, maybe with the help of the flagellum, ascends into the bladder, colonizes more, attaches with its fimbria to the uroepithelium here, and overcomes the neutrophils with its various immune evasion mechanisms, maybe a capsule, maybe formation of a biofilm, right? You know what a biofilm is? You have 5 more minutes. Yes? It's proteins, sugars, macromolecules, DNA, whatever, that the bacteria creates in order to make this thin layer, protective thin layer, or film. That's why it's called a film. It's a thin layer. It's a biofilm. It's a thin layer made of biological material that helps the bacteria, keeps it protected from what? From immune mechanisms and also from antibiotics even. Okay? So, and in the case of a complicated UTI where we have a catheter, for example, it's even easier for the bacteria to get attached to the fibrinogen and to the catheter itself and form an infection. And later on, the bacteria can even ascend up the ureters and into the kidney and cause pyelonephritis or upper urinary tract infections, right? Now it's more serious. It has much more serious complications, as we'll see in the next lecture. It will damage the kidneys and even sometimes get into the blood, causing bacteremia. And we'll come to those in detail, the clinical picture of all what we have said in the next lecture. Is there any question? Okay, thank you.